You're listening to Pathways and Means, a podcast that inspires and shows people how to tap into their creative spirit. We sit down with leaders and makers in every industry to talk about their process, what inspires them, and about how to build incredible things with the power of creativity. The future belongs to the creators, so come join us. This is Pathways and Means.
Welcome everybody to Pathways and Means. Happy New Year. First of all, this is our first show of 2022. Hope you guys had a really nice end to 2021 and you're as excited about going into 22 as we are here at Pathways and Means and here at CPM. So we're entering the year in a pretty strong position. We've got some pretty cool things going on and some big opportunities and that sort of thing. So we're feeling strong here at the team and that got us thinking, we've been having conversations about what exactly is strength? What does it mean to be in a strong place and to have strengths in terms of your professional outlook or in your arts? We actually talk about that no small amount in a few of the products that we've put together and that sort of thing. And it's just been a conversation we've been having around the office about strength and the nature of strength. So we thought we'd come together and talk with you guys about it. So I've invited co-managing partner and co-founder, Mr. Connor England. Please tell the people hello.
What's good, everybody? Happy New Year.
And I think we're going to have a bit of a discussion about it, the nature of strength, the nature of weakness, see what's going on, and set things off right here on the podcast for the new year. So Connor, what do you think of in terms of strength, in terms of talking about it in a professional or personal sense? Just where's your head at right off the bat?
Oh man, it's one of my favorite topics. So a lot of what we have learned and built here at Creative Pathways and Means comes out of the field of positive psychology, which is a movement in the field of psychology, the understanding of the mind about what's good with us. Psychology, for like most of its beginning, was all about diagnosing and understanding what's wrong, where things are malformed, and how to bring you back up to a baseline. But it's really only been since like the mid-90s, like early 90s, mid-90s, that people like Dr. Donald Clifton and other people have been on the scene to lean into some of the good stuff. So when I think of strengths, one of the first places I go, I had a partner that used to say, feeling good, feeling strong. How you doing? Feeling good, feeling strong. Strengths is something that we can very clearly understand. And the more we understand it, the more that we can apply it to our lives. So some people listening, and definitely us around here in the CPM community, a lot of us have heard of something called the Strengths Finder. And the Strengths Finder has been a popularized assessment that is currently owned by Gallup, the old polling company, that's leaned real heavy into this area. And it was actually one of their old CEOs, who is frankly one of the fathers of positive psychology. His name's Dr. Donald Clifton. And he built this assessment not to understand strengths, but to actually discover talents. And a talent, most simply defined, is how you naturally move, think, or act given a certain situation. And what he's found through some of his research is that there are 34 distinct talents, different ways that people can move in the world. So we essentially see, like, look, if I were to put a problem on the table, and I had 10 different people around the table, and I say, I don't know how to fix it, go fix it, go do something with this problem. Every single person around that table is going to act and respond in ways that are completely different and are unique to that individual. And while they share in the same 34, the number of which we call upon, like what your fifth one is, might be somebody else's first, so they're going to jump right to it. The problem's on the table. One person might be all about connectedness. It's who they know. So they're going to get out their phone and they're going to try and reach out to the 5 people that are going to help them fix that problem. Another person might be an activator. So you're like, all right, man, let's jump in. We're going to figure it out one way or another, but it ain't going to happen if we're all sitting around.
We don't need to write things down or check what parts we have. Let's just get in there and solve it.
And then another person might be very deliberative, where like they want to make sure that they look at just about every option before they really set forward, because they don't want to make the wrong one. Now, none of these things are necessarily a positive or negative thing. They're just how we most naturally jump into something, right? And the difference between a talent and a strength is that over time, you take those natural tendencies and you do everything you can to cultivate them into a place where not only do you lean into them right off the bat, but the way that you lean into them is going to be as productive as possible. So when we talk about strengths are things that you call forward, especially if you most naturally do them and you do them well, right? That, at least in the terms of positive psychology, is kind of where we've landed on a strength. And it's a strength because it's something that you're going to do better than other people. Somebody might be as good at it as you are, but it takes a lot of energy because it's not natural. It takes a lot down in here or preparation in order to show up to it, right? Some of those reluctant genius types that end up doing really well at a job or at a creative discipline that like their parents put them in when they were 5, and so they're one of the best dancers on the stage, but oh my God, the second that they get out of high school and college, they can't wait to get far away from it. Hard to say if that's a strength for them, right? It certainly is a talent, but it might not be a strength. There was a quote that came to mind here recently that I've been using on some different materials from a guy named Tiago Forte. He's an artist and an author, and he said this: "You can't compete with somebody having fun." I love that statement. Strengths, more or less, like even if it's not a fun situation, like Ryan, you're going to approach a problem in a completely different way than I am. Or even if we approach it in the same ways, your tendencies to move in a particular way may be stronger or more fun than they are for me. So I'd say when I think of strengths, the first thing that I think of is like, do your best to understand what your particular strengths are. And, I was actually turned on to the StrengthsFinder assessment by one of the world's leading experts on strengths. Her name's Kristen O'Shea. She's a state senator in Kansas, and she shared the main stage with the Gallup CEO plenty of times. She helped roll out the StrengthsFinder university programs all across the country. It's just an absolute juggernaut in this space. For anybody that's interested in learning more about it, you can both go to Gallup, the originators of it, but also take a look at O'SheaStrengthsCoaching.com. There's tons of resources out there, but figuring out what they are, and you can find out just what your top 5 are, so you can find your most common talents and tendencies and how to cultivate them, or you can find out all 34 so that you can see what things do I really have the opportunity to lean into, or what things should I navigate. Like, not everybody needs to be strong at everything. And there really seems to be this cultural pull towards work on your weaknesses. If you haven't, like, if you don't know how to do it, then you spend all of this time and effort figuring out how to go from nothing to mediocre. Like, the amount of time that people are spending so they can get kind of good at something, but never good enough to actually use it, is a lot of energy that could be spent taking you to 80%, 90%. And then all of a sudden you're world class in a couple of areas where you're having fun and no one can catch up to you. Right. So I'm very, very interested in the strengths conversation, because I think the more that people focus on it, the deeper they're going to be able to go in the areas that matter the most to them.
See, and going back to something that you had said, I think it's interesting where we talk about somebody's strength in a particular field might be that they're, that activator and they just want to jump in and do it. Whereas a different strength might be that people want to deliberate and really plan out. It's funny because those are both strengths, and yet in a way that they're kind of opposites. And so that gets us into this conversation sort of about the weakness of strength, where we're talking about these are attributes that could be positive in one spot or maybe positive in most spots, but they just have sort of specific backdraws to them depending on the environment and the situation. So let's talk a little bit about areas where we find that strengths can have drawbacks and what we do when we encounter that.
Absolutely. So I love that you use the phrase, the weakness of strength. It's a concept that I've been working to evangelize ever since the moment that I first came onto it. I actually read it in a book by the guy that started the School of Life. His name's Alain de Botton. And he shares this story of, I'm pretty sure it was Thomas Jefferson. I'm not sure, so don't quote me. And ideally, we'll go ahead and put a link to the story in the description so that other people can have a chance to read it, because it's really, really worth digging into.
Future Ryan, when you're editing the podcast, please put a link in the description.
Bing bong. So,
show notes.
Essentially, the story is this. So there was a luminary in American culture who regularly made his way back out to France. And he had this one writer that just gripped him, right? He loved how there was just sort of this mysterious, ethereal writing style where he didn't jam a particular ending down your throat, right? Like it was sort of nebulous and it left it up to your imagination to decide how things were, and this guy had reached the status to where he had enough pull to reach out to him. And so the next time he was over in France, he'd be writing these letters back and forth, and they would spend months and months trying to establish a time for them to be able to meet. And he would show up at this cafe after all of this months of meticulous planning, and the time would pass. And the time would keep passing. And after several hours of not seeing him, eventually they had to bail, and it was a huge bummer because they had just spent all of this time and this effort to meet someone that really was a big deal to him. Ultimately, by the time he came home, there was another letter that essentially said, "Hey, sorry, plans changed. I didn't mean to be so aloof. We'll definitely make it happen next time." Well, next time comes around, unlike sometimes for some people where it doesn't. Next time came around, and he was sitting in this cafe, and again goes through that same process, and he was waiting, and he was waiting. And then finally, like an hour and a half, 2 hours later, his date ends up showing up. And he's so excited to see him and everything, but he breaks immediately into the story about how there was just this meandering series of events where he was wistfully taken up by them and he didn't know where things were going to go. And so he just kind of let the spirit take him. And in that moment, this guy realizes, oh, it's exactly the same character traits and approach to the world that allow for this man to manifest such wonderful novels that makes him a pain in the ass to grab coffee with, right? It's what can be a strength in one area, if it is not managed and accounted for, can become a weakness in another area. So it's not as simple as just looking at our talents and recognizing that when we're living in them in one way, that all of a sudden it's just going to be good all the time. Mm-hmm. It's understanding and placing your strengths in the right place at the right time and in the right context so they can really, really empower you. Like I'll give you just an example. One of the 34 strengths, one of the 34 talent themes is command, right? And so in a time of crisis, if we're going through a tornado or a hurricane or a military coup or whatever's going on, right? Really pretty good to have a couple of people that are strong with command language so that when chaos ensues and everybody's trying to figure out what to do, there can be one strong, person that is, or a handful of strong people that are like, I need you to go over to do this. We need to make sure that this is done. Everybody meet up at 3:00. It takes the ambiguity away. Not a real solid way to establish a romantic relationship or similar, right? If everybody's just telling everybody what to do. And even then, sometimes it depends on the context. So, just understanding what your strengths and talents are and doing your best to manage them and to give everybody a little bit of grace, because sometimes, like, if somebody is like, maybe there's somebody that's just real get to it and they jump on something on the fly, like some places where there needs to be a little bit more deliberation, that can be frustrating or compromising, but it's exactly that trait that's going to allow for them to dive into opportunities well before anyone else can. And so, aligning yourself based off of your strengths and your traits can help people lean into their top 5 or 10 and to not focus on trying to be everything to everybody. Like if everybody had to cultivate a sense of excellence and strength around all 34 talents, 1, the world would be really boring. 2, we would never get anything done because everybody would spend so much time in personal development that they would end up becoming mediocre at everything and never really excel at anything. So I would just strongly encourage people to lean into this concepts of strengths. You don't need to be everything to everybody. You can be great at 1 to 5 things, change the world and change your trajectory completely.
I mean, that's absolutely right. And especially like looking at it in a professional context or even a social context, really anywhere where you have a group of people or a team. You know, if you're trying to manifest all of the strengths at all at the same time, then you're basically making it into such a situation where other people can't let their strengths then flourish. You know, because if you had a situation where, you know, maybe for the main task of the day, that activator energy just isn't where it is. Maybe we're researching or something like that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't subtasks throughout the day that just need someone to jump on it and get it done. And if you don't have that activator tendency and you're just forcing yourself to do it, you're going to be miserable and you're not going to do it as well because, like we said, you can't beat someone having fun. Meanwhile, the person on your team who does have that activator energy, they're chomping at the bit to go do it. If you let them go do it, they just advance the mission for everybody. They know that they did. They had a great time doing it, and everybody wins because if you didn't have that attribute, then you didn't have to force yourself to do it. So it's a matter of recognizing that it's actually counterproductive, not productive. It's counterproductive to try to be everything in every situation. Even if you want to assert that leadership position to yourself, that doesn't mean doing everything because your strengths are what they are. And if you try to force yourself into a hole that's not your shape, you're robbing people on your team of the ability to help you advance the mission too.
Oh man, 100%. And like, a person that does everything is not a leader. The person that leads people to help participate in the effort is the leader. Like, you don't need people if you're out there doing everything, right? So it shifts the focus. And for the leaders and managers out there, I'm glad that we're having this conversation around strengths in particular, because so Gallup, before they did a lot with like strengths and organizational development, was primarily a polling and research company. So they made sure that their statistics understood the world as it was, as deeply as possible, to the point where they were predicting presidential outcomes and industry research and all sorts of things, right? And they committed to this concept of strengths because it was so powerful across just like the human domain. There's been millions and millions of data points, a lot more than they ever got for a lot of their other research. And so at this point, we know that there has just been some truth that's manifested around strengths. And one of the most powerful and eye-opening things that I discovered when I was looking into some of their research was actually related to management and leadership. So like a whopping 60 some odd percent of the economy is not engaged at work. And of that 60%, like 40% of them are actively disengaged. That's the counterproductive piece, right? That's like, not only I'm not interested in being here, but I'm willing to like sabotage things in little ways because I'm so miserable in my current lot that I'm willing to disengage and to compromise the entire group.
You know, actually, piece of advice for anybody who's running an organization. Here's a good way to tell if that's the general vibe of being. If the sense of humor of everybody involved in the organization is about how they can't believe it's already Monday, geez, I wish the weekend was here, oh, wow, I thought it was 5 o'clock and it's only 11 a.m., that's a problem. And that's sort of how you know, because that's, through 8 hours of a workday, you're going to have those employees are generally speaking between 4 and 5 hours walking around talking to each other or on the phone. And that's somewhat their fault, but it's also just the fault of the fact that the organization is not structured in such a way that everyone's strengths are coming out.
And I'm glad that you said that last part the way that you did, and like structured in such a way that that is the case. What Gallup found, and this was to me one of the most eye-opening and profound pieces of management insight that I've ever received, was that 70% of an employee's engagement at any career, doesn't matter what the job is, at any career, comes down to them having a manager that puts them in places that allow for them to lean into their strengths. 70% of engagement is, am I put in a place where I can thrive and live in my gifts, regardless of the topic? You can be working on things that are completely foreign to you, but if you're an activator, put me in, coach. Right? If you are a deliberator, give me some information that I can look over to make sure that everybody's making the right decision. Because if that is the case, then you feel that you showed up and you contributed in a way that was natural and that you were good at. Mm-hmm. And what more could you ask for in terms of engaging an employee, engaging a partner, a community member? Like 70%. There are other variables, but the greatest bulk of whether or not your people are going to be checking their phone, or worse, checking Monster and Indeed on your computers, is going to be how well am I able to do that? And here's the thing, like, knowledge is power. You can't speak a language that you don't have the words for, but as soon as you have the words, power is knowledge applied. So you need to first know what somebody's strengths are. And people like Kristen O'Shea, people like consultants and coaches at Gallup, they've got the ability for you, and you can even take this test online and go about it on your own. We might even add a link down in the description for those that are interested.
Future Ryan, please do that.
But this concept of strengths, once you see it, it'll change your life forever because you can point to it. We've done all sorts of personality testing, whether it's Hexaco, Dark Triad, things like Myers-Briggs are fun, but they're not as scientifically rigorous. But the Big Five Hexaco and the Dark Triad are really good, and those give you sort of like your being aspect. They let you know healthy elements of your personality. But the StrengthsFinder thing, man, it's like our being is manifested through our doing. And so when somebody reads their top 5 for the first time, it's like rediscovery. And I've never been surprised. I've always been happy, but I've never been surprised when somebody reads their top 5 because you see it. It's literally how people are doing and acting most naturally in the world. It's how they're approaching all sorts of problems and opportunities. And to have a language for that, to know for certain this is what makes me strong, and these are the areas where I'm going to get the greatest leverage if I continue to lean into them and hone them over time. Man, it's like you can go to whatever career it is that you want and know that as long as you're in a position where you can lean into that, man, it's going to be all right.
So empowering. Yeah. Just like you said, I mean, having the words for it, where people might know that they move in a certain way, but now it's, no, these are my strengths. This is what I have to offer. And like you said, to any organization, because they're, across the board applicable. They're what make people so incredible, essentially. And knowing those top 5 areas where you can lean in, it's indispensable. I want to put you on the spot right now here in front of everybody. Okay. So this is the situation. I think it's a lot of fun that we're out here talking about strengths and when they're used in appropriate situations. Here's what I'd like to know. So I'm sure you're familiar with your top 5 strengths. What's one of them that is usually really applicable, but that you've encountered a situation where you leaned into it and it just wasn't right?
Oh, snap. So now we talking the weakness of strength, like for real. So my 5th one has been the one that has given me the most trouble. Some of the greatest success, some of the most trouble. My 5th strength on the StrengthsFinder is maximizer. And maximizer is one of those tricky ones. When you look into the strengths literature, there's like little bitty distinctions that make all the difference. So someone with the strength of developer wants to take something from here and raise it up even a little bit, right? Any positive growth or development makes them feel good. A maximizer, they don't care if you start at 0% or if you start at 80%. They take it to the top. And there are just some times, man, where we talked a little bit about this on the Perfect versus Done podcast,
where we coined the term the maximizer monster, by the way.
That's me. That's my problem. There are times where just getting it done or getting it done a little bit is absolutely the appropriate way to go. We don't always need for everything to be like, you don't got to put actual fireworks sparklers on the kid's cake. Just use a candle. Come on, man. I'm
safer that way.
Pyrotechnics. We're taking it to the moon. And so Strengths are tough too because they can lead to this tricky little psychological phenomenon called projection, where like you're viewing the world through your lens, and so you treat everybody else as if they need to approach problems in the same way. So what this would manifest like for a maximizer, for all our CEOs, especially the super freaks that are out there, a lot of people, especially in high performance organizations, find themselves surrounded by maximizers. They're interested in building the maximum amount of value possible. That can also make them just absolutely incorrigible to work with. So for those types that may have some skeletons walking around the office, definitely reach out to people like Kristen and explore yours. But, you know, something that I've been working on in terms of the weakness of strength has been making sure that I'm able to manage things like my maximizer tendency to know, all right, this is a situation where maximizing is going to have diminishing returns. These are the situations that it's going to be the most appropriate for me to lean into. Potentially most importantly, though, for me to understand that these are my decisions and that I should not try and get everybody to maximize around every single thing, right? That's going to lead to a deflated workplace. There's times where just developing or even just letting things stay the same or slip is the most important thing. So that's been an area in terms of strengths development that I've been working on. And mind you, I'm working on it because it's in my top 5.
Right.
It's not like it's something that's down on my 34th. If I needed something for that, I'm going to find the person that's in their top 5. But seeing as it's a natural tendency of mine, I'm working to do everything that I can to cultivate it from a talent into a strength. That's why it gets my attention.
Well, I have a similar story with that one. Mine is my number 1, actually. And my number 1 is strategy and strategic thinking, which is great, and it's a lot of fun, and it's been very useful. Essentially where, anytime that I'm in some kind of meeting where we're talking about getting a task done, or we have 3 days to pull this off, how do we do it? Well, if the 2 of us go over here until 9:30, and then I do this until 10:15, then we can circle back up at 10:30, and then we have between then and lunch to get this thing done, and I'll just bam, 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 do this, then this, then this, then this, then this, then we'll be done. And it's great, and that really works out. But here's the thing. When you apply that in a negative direction, that's where you can find a little bit of my anxious tendencies. Because what'll happen is, if I make one sort of mistake, then I'm like, okay, that's gonna cause this to go wrong, and then this person will be upset, then they're gonna talk to my other friend who's gonna get really mad at me, then no one's gonna come over for my birthday, and then I'm gonna get really bothered, and I'm gonna deactivate all my social media, and I'm never gonna talk to anyone ever again. And it's like, you can see as bad
like
as the
Bobby Fischer, man. You saw like the whole board move before it ever went.
I mean, I'm saying, like, you can see how the one example is like a really powerful, good way to get ahead professionally or to, grow success in your organization. And the other one is a great way to be paranoid that nobody likes you. Because if you've ever made a mistake, which we all have, then all of a sudden you think, oh, well, this is going to blow up my life in 8 years. And it's like, it's understanding that weakness, that difficulty, and that fear is born from the fact that my first and my primary way of looking at the world is through strategy and through steps. I'm always that person who says, hey, what's your 5-year, your 10-year plan? What are you doing when you're 40? How does your life look in that situation? And I always have answers for that. And, it's to go back to your comment on it, not everyone else does. And that's because their strengths are different. And that's because their talents are different. But just recognizing that tendency to sort of tell myself that this thing will happen 20 steps from now, that's not a different problem. It's the same thing. It's the same attribute that I get so much value out of. And recognizing that has actually made it a little bit easier to work through it, come through it, and figure out ways to work around it and to not be so hard on myself about it, but just to understand that's the weakness of strength. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Man, I love that. I love that a bunch. So I think that it's worthwhile for people to do what they can first to understand what their strengths are.
Yep.
Even having a language, right? Like maybe some people had a click just now that's why the symbol for a chess piece, or why the symbol for strategy is a chess piece. Because we know that the grandmasters can see 20 steps ahead. It's because they can recognize the patterns. right? So pattern recognition or strategy can be a strength. So can just about any other talent, but it has to be something that you cultivate over time. So I am excited to continue this conversation. Everybody's going to continue to work on both their strengths and hopefully bring their top 5 talents from a place of potential and every now and then weakness into a place where they're living in their strengths in powerful and engaged ways over time.
And it's just like you had said, again, it's a matter of putting the language to it, understanding the strategic part. I never would have described myself as a strategic thinker before we did the Strengths Finder, but it just makes so much sense now. I thought, oh no, that's just a thing about me. And it is just a thing about me, but it's also a thing that is understood. There are ways in which you can lean into it and find different paths towards success, like from the people who've come before you who think a similar way. But it starts with applying the language to it. So I definitely think that the first step for understanding your talents and your strengths is to do a deep dive, invest the time, and invest a little bit of resources into figuring out where you stand, and then you can apply those anywhere.
Man, 100%. So I hope wherever it was that you were watching from this, that you find yourself in this new year feeling good, feeling strong.
Feeling strong.
If not, hopefully some conversation pieces that have happened today have made it so that you can lean into this year as we continue to go forth in as strong of a sense as humanly possible. It's been fun. Ryan? I think we'll call it a day.
I think we're calling it good. Let's get out there. Have a good 2022, everybody. We'll have plenty more pathways and means along the way. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found today's episode informative and inspiring. If you liked what you heard and you want to hear more, be sure to subscribe to Pathways and Means wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to learn more about CPM and how to grow creatively into the future, visit creativepathwaysandmeans.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, where we post daily content and connect and engage with creators like you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.